All right, it is October 19th at 1:30 p.m. We're going to commence the Transportation Advisory Committee of the Pikes Peak Area Council of Government. We're going to start by doing introductions and establishing a quorum. My name is Gail Sturdivant. I am the Acting Public Works Director for the City of Colorado Springs and the Chair of the Transportation and Advisory Committee. First, we're going to go around to my right through the room, and then we'll hit folks online.
John Hall with Colorado Department of Transportation.
Jeff Guthrie, Region 2 Planning.
Lan Rao, Mountain Metro Transit Manager.
Jacob Matson, Transit Supervisor, Mountain Metro Transit.
Darren Horsemeyer, Community Planner at Schriever Space Force Base.
Jason Dosh, Town of Palmer Lake, Public Works Supervisor.
Victoria Chavez, El Paso County.
Danelle Miller, Transportation Planner, PPACG.
Jess Bechtel, Tip Planner, PPACG.
All right, we have other staff members that are available in the room, but they are not going to be going through introductions at this moment. But if they come to the podium, they'll do the introductions then. Jared, could you help me go through the folks that are available online?
I'll be happy to. Let's start first with Ben Schmidt.
Ben Schmidt, Public Works Director, City Woodland Park.
And that was muted on RM, but he did introduce himself. Let's go, Dol Grabenik.
Yeah, this is Dol Grabenik, City Engineer for Manitou Springs.
We got William Keenan.
Good afternoon, Will Keenan, FHWA.
Thank you. Lachelle Davis.
Hello, Lachelle Davis, CDOT Region 2 Local Agency.
Lindsay Hawkes.
Good afternoon, Lindsay Hawkes, CDOT Region 2 Planning.
Thank you. Matt Pettit.
Matt Pettit, CDOT Local Agency.
And Chris Padilla.
Chris Padilla, Colorado Springs Airport.
Is there anyone else online that needs to introduce themselves at this time? Hearing none. Jared, it sounds like we have a quorum. Can you confirm, or somebody on the PPACG, it is confirmed we do have a quorum. We're going to move on to item 2, agenda approval. Hopefully everyone had the opportunity to take a look at the agenda. And if there's any comments or revisions, please say so now. Otherwise, I'll be looking for a motion to approve the agenda as published.
Victoria, move approval.
Ben Schmidt, second.
Okay, we have a motion by Victoria, a second by Ben. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed say nay. All right, the agenda is approved as published. We'll move on to item number 3, public comments and presentations. This is an opportunity for the public to make comment for items that are not currently on the agenda. Is there anyone that's in the audience that would like to speak for an item not on the agenda? Seeing none. Anybody online that would like to speak for an item that's not on the agenda?
Madam Chair, I'll just ask if there is anyone online to please use the raise hand function to let us know.
Perfect. Thank you. We'll give them a moment. All right. Jared, it does not appear that we got any hands. Is that correct?
I would confirm. And I would also just say we did not receive any advance requests for public comment or any submitted public comment.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to item number 4, approval of the minutes. The draft minutes were provided in your packets. Hopefully everyone had the opportunity to review those. Any comments or a motion on those minutes?
This is Lan. I move to approve.
And this is Jason. I'll second.
Great. We have a motion by Lan, a second by Jason to approve the minutes as published. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed say nay. All right. The minutes are approved as published. Let's move on to item number 5, Board of Directors report.
Hello. So this Board of Directors meeting was held in Park County. We did have a couple of transportation items that went through the board this month. The board approved the financial plan, which TAC also recommended for approval last month. So we will move forward with that with the LRTP. They also accepted the Community Traffic Safety Education Review document. The document that we kind of refer it to in-house as the gap analysis. So that was a consent item that was approved. And we also had an informational presentation on the regional freight study, which you'll hear about more today as well. In addition to that, we held an informal board workshop this Monday regarding the TPR study with CDOT, and I believe there are a few folks that would like to discuss that at this point.
Yeah, thank you, Danielle. Both myself and Victoria had the opportunity to join in on that presentation. For those of you who aren't aware, with some legislation from the state that was passed this last year, one of the things that commissioned CDOT to go through and do an a TPR boundary study that has to be submitted. CDOT's recommendations have to be submitted to the Transportation Commission, but in November. So they've been going through and doing that activity. They came down and briefed what their draft recommendations appeared to show at the previous STAC meeting. And I'll just share, and Victoria, please correct me if I get this wrong, but one of the reasons why we asked for this special meeting was because of the concerns in that draft recommendation. It would take the rural portions of El Paso County, which is currently part of the Central Front Range TPR, and move that into PPACG's boundary. We've had some concerns about that, most of them really around, and this is where I'll ask Victoria if I get this wrong, but I think the two main concerns are around the autonomy to be able to plan in the more global rural nature that Park Teller and the rural portions of El Paso County have. And then two is really about the distribution of funding that's going to be impacted. In the presentation, it was noted that the current two areas of funding that would be impacted was RPP, which is the Regional Paving. Thank you, Regional Priority Project. I knew I had that wrong all of a sudden. And the other is that MMOF, or the Multimodal and Mitigation Option Funding. It would also set the groundwork to have impacts for future state funding opportunities should they become available. I will tell you that, and I will express what I feel like we heard, that regardless of the concerns that we have from PPACG, and I will say Victoria for representing the Central Front Range directly, that we felt like we were heard, but there's not going to be any changes to the recommendation that will likely go forth to what's going to happen to the Transportation Commission. So anyway, we have some global concerns, and I could be wrong about that, but that was really the sense we got at the end as it wrapped up. Like, these are our recommendations, and it will go to the Transportation Commission, and they will make a decision, and they will start the rulemaking process. And CDOT was going to encourage them to make the rulemaking process or open it as quickly as possible versus maybe waiting a month or two for some of the new transportation commissioners to get on board and start really participating and getting their feet underneath them in their new roles. So that was just my report out on what we heard on that. And I'm happy to answer questions about that. I will say it opened up a secondary set of questions and concerns that I did want to talk about with TAC today, and it has to do with local match funding. Again, as we're talking about impacts to rural El Paso County, frankly, they beat up on me. They thought that the city of Colorado Springs was just going to take the little bit of money that was going to the rural El Paso County and Park and Teller County at that time, or decrease the amount of money that's going there. But it really opened up the local match, particularly on the MMOF funding, which today for all of El Paso County is 50-50. Really, that became very glaringly apparent. Maybe that's the problem we have to fix versus putting energy around changing the TPR boundary. So I did want to bring that up as one of those items. And I think it would be important for us to understand. I think there's a process in place, but it sounds like it's maybe a little arduous to get an exception for the local match. And I know Jason from Palmer Lake had to go through it. So one, I would like to understand what the process is today to get that exception. But two, if this TRP boundary was going to change should we put some stipulation or work with the state to put a stipulation on the local match requirement that instead of all of El Paso County being 50-50 or 50% local match, that we change that to anybody in El Paso County with a population of 10,000 or less, that they would be exempt from having the local match. They could get 100% award on MMOF. And we thought that would actually help both the folks that are now be pushed from Central Front Range TRP into PPACG and help the folks that are in Central Front Range, at least the ones that are El Paso County. And I think, Victoria, I know you know the local match better. Where are Teller and Park and their local match requirement?
Wrong button. Sorry. All right. Now I don't know how to turn it off. Okay. Teller and Park. Honestly, I don't know that off the top of my head. I'm betting that it's not 50%, but honestly, oh, do you know? Please share.
And for those of you viewing at home, Laura Cruz is coming to the microphone.
Jeff can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure he may be looking at it. Why don't you go ahead and talk? You are a person. Thanks, Jeff. Do you have it in front of you? Go ahead. Oh, no, you don't. It says HP. So actually for Teller, it's kind of funky, and same thing with Park. So Cripple Creek, the town of Cripple Creek is the only jurisdiction that has no match requirement. Everybody else in Teller has a 50% match requirement. Same thing with Park County. Park County actually has a 50% match requirement, which I think is a little crazy. Well, part of Park County does not have 50%. I don't really remember what that number is, but Fairplay has a 50% match requirement. So it's kind of skewed, but the only jurisdiction in Teller that has no match and it's not 50% is Cripple Creek.
So then it sounds like it is possible to split out a county into smaller jurisdictions. And obviously, I have no skin in this game because we're going to be over that 10,000 number. But for our smaller communities, it just seems to make sense. And they, Calhan, Rama, Palmer Lake, I think they're probably over 10,000. But some of those smaller areas, they struggle to come up with 100% match. They struggle to come up sometimes with their 17% match.
Right.
So I thought it was a great concern that you brought up. The other concern that I have from the perspective of being on both PPACG and the Central Front Range is, yes, through PPACG, I get to work with Park and Teller, but in the Central Front Range, there's also Custer and Fremont County. And so it gives me a secondary opportunity to work with jurisdictions that we don't have within PPACG. If they move us all into PPACG, then I only get to coordinate with Park and Teller. So there was a big line of communication that I think we lose. In addition to the monetary issue, we also just lose that opportunity to coordinate with some of our other partners who Fremont County, they send a lot of employees to us every year, up 115. So that was the other aspect of my concern, was not just the funding. So literally the rural part of the MMOF funding would be $15,000. You can't build anything with $15,000. But if I'm in the larger Central Front Range, I have an opportunity to go for the 314 whatever thousand that they get. Sometimes we apply for it, sometimes we don't. We allowed Calhan to apply for it. We didn't try and compete against them, but we've had 30-year working relationships, and with me on the Central Front Range, 15 years of relationships with those other counties. And we work really, really well together. So putting our rural parts of El Paso County into basically an MPO, I see no benefit in it. I didn't hear any benefit from CDOT about it. And so we really hope that they listen to us and recommend to the STAC in November that the rural parts of El Paso County remain in the Central Front Range.
I had a question online, Danielle. Is that what you were going to tell me, or is it something else you wanted to add?
No, I was actually, I brought up the CDOT guidance, and unless it has changed since December of 2021, it looks like both Park and Teller counties are actually at 25%, not 50. Correct, 50. Woodland Park is at 50. It is, yes.
Okay, so there's some minor variations. Regardless, though, yes, Jeff.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Point of clarification for everybody. I chatted with Michael Snow, the MMOF statewide program manager, last week whenever this discussion was going on, asking him, just remembering that there were a couple of entities in Region 2 at least that did apply for a local match reduction in the MMF program. There is a route. I think it's outlined in the program guidelines. If it's not, I can certainly outline that after consulting with Michael. I will say there was a handful of agencies, both towns and counties, who, let me back up, 100% of the small handful of jurisdictions that did apply to the Transportation Commission for a match reduction were granted said match reduction. And I believe in all cases down to 0, but I could be wrong. I can stand corrected. And that being said, the formula, which I right now cannot explain to you all the math behind this, but I at least have the different percentages, the weighting applied to each category. This is a pretty lengthy formula with something like, 10 different, I want to say, categories to consider. And so, which are different for both urban and rural, you're all aware of. Some categories are not considered for the urban, some are not considered for the rurals, vice versa. And so I don't think that it's slamming the door on a reduction match for anybody involved. I also don't know if STAC will revisit this to then make us a new revised recommendation to the Transportation Commission, let's say going forward, for how MMOF is distributed statewide. So it's not as black and white, and it's definitely not the end of things as we know them, if that's any consolation.
Thank you, Jeff. Dole, it sounds like you have a question.
Yeah, I was just curious. I was happy to hear about the opportunity to reduce the multimodal match requirement. So we may try to pursue that as a city.
Okay, great. John, it looks like you have your hand up.
Yeah, a couple of things. First is that I think the meeting on Monday where CDAT came in actually, from my perspective, went a little better because I do know that there has been additional discussions going over some of the concerns, and I know there's additional discussions going on with El Paso County officials. So at this point, nothing has gone to the point where we've been asked to put this on the agenda for action. So you can infer from that what you will, but at this point, some of those concerns may have in fact been acknowledged and acted upon, and you might have a result that you would favor. The second thing for the MMOF, again, my understanding is this is things that are within our control, and for the most part, we'll ask Michael Snow to come to the next meeting, but we have to remember, if we have $100,000 in MMOF and we have $10,000 projects, well, let's make the math easier for John. If you have $10,000 projects, right? And then half of those are going to be done with the match. Then all of a sudden, instead of getting 10 projects under that 100,000, you could get 20 projects under that 100,000, right? So I think for the most part, the approach of at least our former transportation commissioner and some folks is, if you all as a region sort of want to allow the waivers, that's fine. Just remember that as you're allowing those waivers, that means you take up more of the pot to do the project. So that's why I think as Jeff has mentioned, there has been zero folks come and turn down because the first pass at the approval process is you all as jurisdictions and doing the TAC recommendation. So if you're all fine with taking your amount of money and getting and waiving everybody, so that way you get half the projects that if everybody paid the full amount, that's fine. It's no skin off of CDOT's nose. And I think that's fine, especially given the jurisdictions we have. I don't think it hurts to get half the projects kind of fully funded that way. But that's sort of that first thing is everyone has to realize if everybody gets a waiver, that means we're funding the whole project with the MMOF, not half of it. So therefore you'll get half the projects. But as long as everyone's cool with that, it moves through. And as long as, again, everyone understands that the State Transportation Commission can pull it off and vote on it. And I don't know where our new transportation commissioner is on that, but that's been sort of that, the last commissioner, I think, had that understanding that as long as it's gone through that local process, they didn't need to monkey with it too much at the state process, but we can bring Michael Snow in.
Well, can I ask two questions or follow up on that, John? Thank you for that, by the way. One, since we're just wrapping up our call for projects and we're getting ready to do the tip, how do we know up front that, and I'm going to pick on Palmer Lake because you were successful in doing that. Say he has a $10,000 project, total project cost, and he originally, if he had to do 50% match, would just be asking for 5,000. Does he ask for the whole 10,000 up front? And then okay, so we did, so we could do that. So one, I just want to make sure I understood that portion of the process. Two, for our region, whether we have the rest of rural El Paso County included in PPACG or not, could we put a regional policy in place where if we would support 100% funding on MMOF grant funds if the population, say, if it was under 10,000 as a practice? So the Palmer Lakes of the world, Green Mountain Falls, Manitou, all those folks that they know that they're below that threshold, that at least the TAC would hear them out in consideration for those projects and support them on that waiver for the local match. Or we'd say, nope, sorry, there's too many other projects and, we end up voting on it. We'll have a sumo wrestling fight out in the hallway, whatever it's going to take to determine whether that makes sense. But if this is really a concern for our more rural communities or smaller communities is really what I should say, then should we be looking at a policy practice within PPACG to maybe help regulate that?
And so
Can I make a clarifying question before you? Yeah. So if you go through the TC and get the waiver, does the money come out of PPACG's pot or does it come out of the state pot?
PPACG's pot.
Oh, so it comes out of it. Okay. That was the clarification I needed. Now I know how to think. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think to answer your question, we always have to remember that at the end of the day, it's the State Transportation Commission. And so and again, we just had a turnover of 6 different chairs, right? So maybe the next time we go through this process, something we think is okie dokie, they could certainly say, nope, we have ultimate control. But making the assumption that, again, they respect the local decision-making process, we can certainly do that. But again, at some point, you can either say it's a standing thing, but again, depending on the number of applications you get, you might not necessarily want to say, well, we're going to let everybody slide, and now we're going to remove some projects from that cannot be funded, because it is conceivable that, oh, well, we can fund everybody, but instead of giving everybody who asks for a zero match, now they can only have a 10% or whatever. I mean, you can put that in place and we can put it in the TIP policies and procedures. Just know that it's not necessarily going to be honored by the State Transportation Commission because they're the ultimate authority. But anything else that you want to do as a standing rule, I believe is appropriate and can be done.
Thank you for that. And I think that, go ahead, Danielle.
Just one other point of clarification. MMOF is the only funding source that comes through PPACG that nonprofits are eligible for. And we have had nonprofits apply for MMOF. So that is another consideration that TAC just might want to think about if a policy is developed.
Madam Chair, I have a comment and a question.
Yes.
I just want to add to what John mentioned. The MMOF funding, especially from the state funding sources, has been a very valuable funding source for MMT. We don't have a local match problem today, but there were times that we were really scrambling and struggling finding that local match to bring in additional federal monies. And this MMOF funding is such a valuable source for us to bring in additional resources into the region for MMT operations and capital projects. So that's my comment. My question for Victoria and Gail is, from that meeting, do they plan to include your concerns and comments when they present, CDOT staff presents to STAC?
I don't know the answer to that.
We don't know the answer. I will tell you I felt at the end, I didn't think we were making much traction, to be quite honest with you, but it's interesting that John shared with us that he's hearing that there has been more discussion. So maybe there has been additional consideration. So we don't know the answer to that, but it does sound like in the November STAC, which would be their next meeting, that's where the CDOT will be presenting their recommendations. And then from the STAC, it would go to the Transportation Commission. So, and then the commissioners themselves have to take some action. They could choose to open up, they have to go through a rulemaking portion, and they would have to set the parameters for that and when it would start and if it was going to be a month or if it was going to be, I think it could be even longer. Did they have a deadline, Jeff, that you recall that they had?
30th of next year, I believe, is the date that they must make the decision by, which can include no action.
Right. So there you go. So something's going to happen between November because CDOT has to make the recommendation. I can't remember the exact date, but it was in November. So essentially to get in front of the Transportation Commission, they have to go to the November STAC and commission meeting.
I believe it's November 2nd is the STAC meeting.
Yeah,
Yes,
and
I
those,
think you're correct.
yes, you are correct. And those meeting materials are generally out a week before, so you can check the CDOT STAC website and see what those recommendations are before that meeting occurs.
Thank you.
Can I make one other comment about MMOF? Just for everybody's awareness, in case you're not aware, MMOF can be used to match other funding sources. I know this is something that a lot of the other regions are doing frequently, leveraging MMOF as the match for, say, TAP funding. So when you're putting in applications, just be aware of that.
Great. Kathleen, it looks like you have your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to say, first of all, for MMOF, there is a STAC summary report that goes out, and the actual numbers and the formula are outlined in that document. And I can send that on to John. And so you guys can have that as a resource if you don't have the STAC summary.
Yeah, send it to Danelle. Otherwise, it'll just sit in my inbox.
Okay. And then the other thing is you had a question about will Herman take the Pikes Peak input into consideration, and he certainly will. And I would imagine that in the plan, if there are things that don't completely agree with what the recommendation is of CDOT, that it will be noted what the public input and stakeholder input was regarding the decision, so that the TC has a full picture of what people are thinking outside of CDOT staff, as well as the rationale for CDOT staff's recommendations.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kathleen. Any other further discussion around the Board of Directors report or this tier or TPR boundary or MMOF local match funding at this point?
So we should have invite Michael Snow to our next meeting still. I would think yes, but
I tell you what, can we put him on as a potential agenda item either for November or December? I think that we want to resolve some other things maybe first. I think this discussion on the local match is going to be something we might want more information on, but I think can the TAC let you know if we would like to invite him at this point?
Sure, and if there's no objection, we'll leave that to the discretion of the chair. So, Gail, you just let us know if you want him for next month or the month after. And in the meantime, we'll reach out to him and ask him to be on standby and put a tentative hold on our meeting dates, and we'll go from there. And Kathleen, just give him a heads up if you don't mind. Oh, she's got her hand up.
Yes, Kathleen.
Just want to say, I've chatted Michael Snow. He may not be available right now, but if the opportunity presents itself, he might be able to jump into this meeting if he happens to catch my chat. That's just something to think about. If he jumps on today, he may or may not, probably not, but just that's a possibility.
Yeah, thank you for that, Kathleen. I think that we're going to be done with this issue today. We've got some other agenda items that are going to take some time. So if we want to have more discussion on it, we will get something on his schedule in the next few months. But thank you.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
All right. Unless there's any objections, I'm going to move on to item number 6. Discussion items. There's nothing posted on the agenda. I felt like we discussed what we needed to as a result of the board of directors. So unless there's any objections, I'll move on to item 7A, which is the long-range transportation plan, the survey results, the vision goal, and then the agenda just moved on me. Danielle.
Thank you. So there's several elements of the LRTP in our packet today, and some things that we'll discuss. Just before we get into that, just wanted to give a quick status update. The travel demand model is ongoing. The land use modeling is also ongoing. I believe we'll have some additional meetings set up fairly soon regarding that piece of it. We did hold our second Regional Transportation Plan Advisory Committee meeting on October 12th. A few of the folks here were able to attend, and we really appreciate your support and your participation in that. The active transportation plan has been kicked off with Olson, and they're working on the initial phases. They also did some survey work at the Rat Pack meeting. And then Lan or Jacob, do you have an update on transit and the coordinated human services plan?
So yeah, we kicked off the regional transit plan back in mid to later September. So that is underway. And then earlier this week, we kicked off our specialized human service transportation plan. That was back on Tuesday. So those are both underway and are coordinating with PPACG and making sure that we include the appropriate parties for each of those plans, and making sure that we're all working together to see the best update we can to each of those plans along with the LRTP. So.
Thank you, Jacob. So we do have a few discussion/action items. The first one is some LRTP survey information. We did receive about 880 unique responses. And there's an attachment in your memo or in your packet today that just gives some high-level overview information on that survey. And we also have a little report that Kearns and West has developed for us that we will also send out to all of the jurisdictions for your awareness and your use. I don't know how interested folks in the room are regarding that survey, but we can certainly go through anything you'd like. Couple of differences between our previous LRTP survey and this one. Concerns on congestion have increased from about 50% of respondees to about 62%. Walking on a weekly basis increased from about 27% to 53%. And taking transit has increased from 3% to 8%. Of course, it's important to realize that our survey is not statistically valid. It is kind of a whoever filled it out kind of thing. Got emailed from person to person quite a bit. There was also quite a few open open comment opportunities for folks, and we did receive quite a bit of contradictory information through the course of the survey. For example, 71% of folks said that they would be likely or extremely likely to walk if that option was available, convenient, safe, and low stress. But then when they were later asked in the survey to rank transportation priorities, trails and sidewalks were last in the prioritization. So a lot of kind of
the risk of a walk.
a lot of kind of contradictory information. There was certainly some people that said, I'm going to drive my car regardless. A good portion said we would bike more if it was available. So that full summary will come out to all of the jurisdictions. But if you have additional questions, please let me know. I think unless anybody has comments or questions specifically on the survey, we can move on to the next kind of bullet, which is our vision and goals or principles. I think we're actually going to adjust the word principles to goals to better align with our FHWA language. But the Rat Pack developed a vision and goals for the 2050 LRTP. We've actually made a couple of updates to the goals from our version that's in our packet today. But we'd like to have everybody take a look at those. There are handouts on your table for folks in the room. And we're hoping to get TAC recommendation for approval today on these items so that we can move forward with putting those into the LRTP. Does anyone have any questions? Would you like me to read them or walk through any of those changes?
Just the one change on them.
There was, yep, the preserve and enhance was reversed previously to enhance and preserve. We also added in, we adjusted the wording on number 5 to say environmental and population growth context. Before it was a little more vague.
Didn't we have to add like equitable for Chelsea from the Downtown Alliance?
Correct, yes. Yep. And these were built on the principles from the 2045 plan originally. The Rat Pack, after discussions, really tried to streamline some of those and make them more reader friendly for the general public.
Danielle, that scale, could you maybe give some more discussion about item number 5 and the goals?
Sure. So there was some, I can't remember what the wording was previously, but there was some discussion regarding at the Rat Pack meeting about making sure that the goals or the principles reflect population growth, and specifically, I think before it said something about natural context or man-made context or something like that. So they really wanted to adjust that wording to reflect the growth that's happening in our region and that is projected in our region. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I just feel like this goal could be misinterpreted, and I guess that's why I was asking more about the discussion that came around it. And I was also wondering if I could come up with some alternate language to propose to make it more clear, but I haven't come up with that. So
we certainly can take adjusted language from here. The goal for us as PPACG is to obviously take this from TAC to CAC and to board and get it adopted at board so that we can move forward in the incorporating it into the LRTP process, but certainly open to edits.
yeah, and I'll just maybe try to share what my concern is, depending on who's reading it, and their interpretation could be that we don't want to have any growth. We want to keep our transportation system the way it is, or we're going to have growth, so we're just part of a different or more robust transportation system. So that's why I feel like it might need number 5 needs some retooling.
Do we have the original language from number 5? And not that we're in a rush, but here's how the process, here's my take on the process. So it's just my take is we had a meeting it was great because we sort of took the 2045 and a lot of people looked at it and said, well, gee, why is it so wordy and why have we tacked all those things on? And for those of you who participated in 2045, which was about half over by the time I got here, but Tim and Victoria, I think you guys were doing 2045, Jason, right? What happened was in 2045, they came up with language and every time they went to try to adopt it, someone would say, well, I want sort of this to change. So it's like that, that Christmas tree, right? It kept on adding ornaments and it kept on going through. And finally it was like, all right, enough already. So it just became, and so the first thing they look at and said, well, this makes no sense. It's gone through the process so many times. And so let's really wordsmith it. And Kearns and West did a great job. And again, we're talking about the first Rat Pack meeting. Kearns and West did a great job of saying, okay, taking the 2045, let's look at that. And a lot of the stuff was trimmed away. It was much more concise and everything else. And we were golden. I shouldn't say golden, but it went well. And then it came back to the second Rat Pack meeting, and you correct me if I'm misstating here, but the sort of corrections or the things that got Christmas treed on again was again folks that didn't necessarily go to that first meeting.
In some cases.
Yeah, and it didn't have that original buy-in from sort of that bigger group. So what I would suggest is if we have the language of the original number 5 and you like that better than the revised number 5, then I think we could just say we're going with the original context and text that was invited by the Rat Pack, and we can move forward. Or obviously we can go ahead and table the item and it can come back next month after you guys have a chance to word it. I just want to make sure that, again, we don't sort of go through this endless death loop of somebody makes one change and then when it comes back again, somebody else wants to make another change and we can never come to consensus because we've empowered each individual to sort of continue to add stuff, even if they haven't been to all of the meetings. And I'm not picking on any one particular person, but that's just sort of where we're at with sort of citizens input. So if you've got it, let's chat about that.
Going back even farther than what's on your screen now, the 2045 goal was protect and enhance the environment by implementing transportation solutions that are sensitive to natural and human contexts. It was changed by the Rat Pack to the number 5 that you see on your screen here, and then further changed by the Rat Pack to the sensitive to environmental and population growth contexts.
So like an eye doctor, better 1, better 2, or you want to make a new appointment?
I think we need to either go back to the original language or come up with something different for number 5, because I am not comfortable in the current position. Again, City of Colorado Springs will have one vote on this, but that would be my recommendation. I'm not comfortable with where we're at now. And frankly, I'm wondering if we've made this so complex, even in these last drafts, should we just implement responsible transportation solutions, period?
I like that. So one alternative that I think would address your concern and also sort of work it into what the other group did is to say sensitive to environmental and population contexts and just take growth out as an alternative. And then I have one more. I would really like to see number 3 talk about not only resiliency, but redundancy as well. Mm-hmm. And I had that in the chat. I didn't get it typed quick enough.
Sure.
And those are often linked. There's no problem adding that.
So that's for your consideration on number 5, Gail.
Thank you for that, Victoria. For other TAC members, any thoughts on this particular language? So I just want to make sure clear the things that we've discussed and I want to make sure, one, we're clear on the two things we've discussed for potential changes, and then I will, after I get a head nod, I will try to phrase it in what could be a motion that somebody else could make if they choose. So on number 3, on number 3, so Victoria, to make sure I got this, you were proposing to change that to increase the safety, security, and resiliency and redundancy of the multimodal multimodal transportation system.
Sorry, you could just say increase safety, security, redundancy, and resiliency.
Okay. And number 5, and I have to tell you right now, I'm not 100% sure that I'm married to number 5 yet, but what you were proposing, Victoria, for consideration was it to be to drop the word growth. That would say implement transportation solutions that are sensitive to environmental and population contexts.
Sorry. You could say context or considerations, but I'm also, to be quite honest, okay with your shortened version as well.
Which was implement responsible transportation solutions.
I like this one better.
The
Responsible.
responsible transportation
Responsible.
solutions.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to try to state something as that somebody could pick up as a potential motion. You don't have to make it. If somebody else is more than welcome to step up and do this, but I would say that we recommend approval of the proposed 2050 draft vision and principles with 3 noted changes. One, that principles will be changed to goals. That number 3 will be reworded to state increase the safety, security, redundancy, and resiliency of the multimodal transportation system. And number 5 would be changed to implement responsible transportation solutions.
So moved. Victoria.
Second, Len.
Right. Any further discussion on this item? All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say nay. All right, so now you have a vision and goals for the
Thank you.
2050 plan. And did we miss an action item before that one?
No, we have an additional action item after
Perfect.
this.
So I'm gonna turn it back over to you then to walk us through that then.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have the LRTP scoring criteria. And this obviously will be used to assist in the project selection. We did have some small changes in the last few months that have been integrated into the scoring as proposed by the various jurisdictions. We also had a discussion on the safety criteria in particular that I wanted to bring to the TAC. And I may be phoning a friend here with Will. But there was some discussion of, rather than making a standard point award based on the number of crashes, that we would adjust the number of points based on the severity of the crash within the radius of the location. We also had a suggestion from Colorado Springs to use the level of safety service calculation. And unfortunately, PPACG just doesn't have the data right now for that analysis. We don't have Diaxis. We also don't have the daily traffic count for all of the region to support that. And due to the timing, we're trying to give the jurisdictions as much time as possible to submit projects. We also recognize on the back end, we're trying to give as much time as possible for the modeling and GHG effort, which really shortens the amount of time we have to actually score the projects and do the selection process. So we did talk internally and wanted to bring some sort of alternative to the TAC. So we could develop a high injury network corridors option that we could utilize in scoring. And Will can talk a little bit about this more, but it's something that DRCOG has utilized as well. They're using it right now for a regional Vision Zero effort they're going through. I'm not sure what the impact to scoring would be, if that would create a noticeable difference or not. But we did want to let everybody know that we did think about this. We did want to provide other options as alternatives, and just wanted to bring it to TAC to see what your thoughts are, and also if there are any additional scoring changes that you want to make. Again, we do have a little bit of time before we have to adopt this, but we do intend to take this to the board prior to project selection, which would be in January. So we're hoping to get some consensus on the scoring criteria in the next 2 months.
Okay. Thankfully, we had a chance to talk about it because we had some emails exchanged after we proposed the LOSS. One thing that I think is important that I think we could get behind, that if we had a simplified scoring mechanism, that there is a history of fatalities or severe crashes versus not having a moderate to low crash history. Could we make a simple 3 to 4 point difference or a value system for the safety scoring that anyone could pick up just based on their crash history? Is that something that could be considered? Will, would that be helpful to you? Helpful to us. And Victoria, and I'm actually going to ask you to weigh in on this too, if you could.
Will, when you get to the microphone, I think looking at our existing crash database, we have fatalities, and then what other sort of breakdowns do we have?
We break it into 4 categories. So it's property damage only, minor injury. If there was a transportation involved, then it was considered serious injury, and then fatality. So those are the 4 classes. That's easy to come up with. What we thought might be an easy solution was that high injury network, again, based on something that DRCOG had already put together. And in that case, it would only be looking at what we call KSI crashes. So if there were either a fatality or a serious injury involved. And then we would be able to do the analysis to look at any of the federally funded road segments that are within the MPO and come up with effectively the top 50% of those based on those KSI crashes. And then that would make up the corridors, basically the high injury network corridors. And if you had a route that was on that, then you had a higher rate of KSI. We were thinking we would go back for the 5 years of available data. So it would be a fairly good sample size. Right now, that's roughly 70,000 accidents to consider. And that's something that we could do in-house fairly easily. If we wanted to do it based just on crash statistics themselves, that's totally acceptable as well. We have that data. Again, it would just come down to, what's the thresholding, right? Is it if there's 1, is it 3? Like, where do we want to? How do you want us to break that up when we do the analysis to determine the ranking for this?
So I kind of like the way we have it already written in here. From my perspective, after having just done a local road safety plan, the difference between a property damage accident and a serious or a minor injury is the use of a seatbelt. So, any crash can potentially be a serious crash. It could be a fatality just because somebody chose or chose not to wear a seatbelt. So I think they're important to look at all of them, the crashes that are happening. So I like what's proposed here already.
I could live with that, Victoria. How about that?
And given from our perspective, how much staff time does it take versus not?
Right.
Is the juice worth the squeeze? So
Right.
You wouldn't get an argument out of us if we left it the way it was.
Well, I tell you what, why don't we leave it as proposed, but can we talk about the application for the projects and maybe taking a different approach on that might be simplified for us and for you, frankly, when you go through and do the modeling, that instead of doing maybe separate applications for each project, that we give you all of our projects with the data fields that we need in one Excel spreadsheet to include the description, and the scoring, the self-scoring, or the based on the limited information we have on some of these projects right now, and feed that in for the model at that point in time. Doing it that fashion, I know the city of Colorado Springs, and I'm not going to speak for anyone else on there, we're trying to do our desired 5-year funding bands. I think, though, that there is a potential that this approach might, as we go through to fiscally constrain the plan, that there might be issues. So if there are, then I would propose that we have a workshop with the TAC members to basically move projects from the proposed 5-year funding band to others to fiscally constrain the project, as opposed to being solely based on the scores, but frankly, at this point, are going to be immature because the projects haven't fully been developed yet. Victoria.
So I agree with you on many of those points. I know that looking at the application that has been sent out, I'm going to struggle to put in applications because there's just data that we don't have. We know we need a project from here to here, but do I know if I need turn lanes? Do I know if I needed a signal? Do I know if I need all of these things that we're asking for in operational enhancement? On the maintenance, like I might have a PQI or a PMA number right now, but what does that matter if my project's in 30 years? The other thing is on the application, we're listing out every single funding source. And I think the last time we did this, we just lumped it into one and figured out our fiscal constraint that way. Why do I have to tell you which funding source and then we all have to argue over which funding source when really it's the big number for the whole plan that we really just need, that you all just need to do the plan. Fighting over which funding source, whether it's MMOF, safe routes, surface transportation, it doesn't seem to make sense to me at this level of a 20-year plan.
Yeah, I would concur, and I would actually turn and look to the PPACG staff. Would that be an acceptable approach to basically look at it as a larger funding bucket, giving the super high level we are with these projects at this point and working the fiscal constraints that way?
Yes, absolutely. And we're absolutely also open to readjusting that spreadsheet so all the projects can be in the same spreadsheet. We were just trying to make it easier to support the scoring and also to support the jurisdictions. But if there's adjustments that need to be made to better support the jurisdictions, we can do whatever's needed. And we'll resend that out. And we also agree with the banding and the financial constraint concern there.
Yeah, but just for me, the banding is the first 5 years, which is pretty much the next tip, and then a 10-year band and a 10-year band. So,
okay, you're right. We did make that change. I apologize for
yeah, you heard me drone on for literally years about 5-year bands, and then when we got there, Will's like, "Why are you doing 5-year bands?" And after I recovered from being slapped across the head, I said, "Yeah, let's do 10 years."
Okay. Can I actually propose that a city staff member in Victoria, because she's a staff of one right now, maybe we could. That's right. What I was actually going to propose, maybe to help you so we don't have iterations, that maybe you could have a workshop with probably Victoria and Tim Roberts from our staff to basically build the spreadsheet or the columns of the data that you feel like are necessary to fulfill the requirements for the LRTP.
Absolutely.
Okay. I just voluntold Tim, and Victoria gave me a head nod, so I want to make sure that was clear. And anyone else is welcome to join them, but I think they've got the most projects in there that would make most sense for them too.
Madam Chair,
yes,
if you can include Erin McCauley from MMT, she's our safety officer. Thank you.
So included. She's also been voluntold. Yes, John.
And I guess this is a question for you, but so do we need to ask about the scoring? Because if we're going to change the data that it needs to be in the spreadsheets, the 3 spreadsheets, a lot of the data that we're asking for then is reflected back in the scoring criteria. So if you're comfortable with the scoring, we can move with this criteria, we can move forward. But there's criteria you want to remove. And so then we would remove it now. And then when we rebuild the application, if there was data that was being collected for that criterion, we no longer have to do that. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I would propose with what you have here today that we move ahead with that scoring today. And then as this workshop comes up, if they feel like there's something different that pops up, then they come back to us with this revised approach to the application and any modification to the scoring criteria at that point. Unless, Victoria, you have a different thought. Anybody else? Lan, is that okay? So I think yes, John.
I'm sorry, I'm just thinking out loud because, again, I don't know if you've heard me whine about this before, but we're, 14 months. We have an item on the agenda for next month where we're talking about the vision and goals, and we can move the scoring in it as well and sort of get the board approval. So I think we can go ahead and do that, but if you guys want to change something, we can take it back to the board later. Or do you want us to sort of hold off and not bring this to the board until later?
Well, I believe we were getting ready to vote on approving the scoring criteria as published in our packets today.
Then I'll just.
And then if we need to, we will ask for an amendment from the board in the future based on the result of this working group we just put in place. Does that seem reasonable? Yes. All right. So I think what we're looking for is a motion to approve the LRTP scoring as presented in our packets today.
I make a motion to approve the scoring that's in our packet today.
All right. Thank you, Jason, for that motion. Can I get a second? Anybody online that would willing to give us a second for the proposed scoring?
This is Chris Padilla, I second.
All right. Chris Padilla is second. Any further discussion?
Airport, I don't believe is a voting member.
Oh,
I don't believe they can make or second motions. Is that correct?
I believe you are correct.
So
That is correct.
no, you're cool, Chris, and we appreciate you trying to move the meeting along. I just didn't want to come into problems later.
we were going to send you cookies. Anyone else would like to make a motion? A second to Jason's motion to approve the scoring, preferably from a voting member of the TAC.
Yes, please.
Dole. Dole.
Sure. This is Dole. I second the motion.
All right, we have a motion from Jason, a second from Dole. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 I abstain.
All right, any nays? So the motion still does pass with one abstention from El Paso County.
So somewhere the Robert from Robert Rules of Order is just turning in his grave.
Look, I'm pretty sure we did okay. All right, let's move, unless Danielle, you have anything else on this. I believe we had all the action items required under item 7A, correct?
I believe that is correct. Thank you.
All right, so we'll move on to item 7B, the regional freight study. Jason?
Good afternoon. I'm going to come up to the podium just so I have a microphone. Going to get us caught up on the regional freight study a little bit. Just to put things back in context for us, since it's been a few months, we started the study in February 2023 by hiring Cambridge Systematics as our consultant to lead the effort. Basically, the reason we're doing this is so we can offer better support to our member governments who have freight-related projects they want to advance through grant processes, through state and federal prioritization processes, and just to aid in our regional economic competitiveness. It's kind of a blue sky project for the region. There's never been a regional freight plan or study before, so it's very interesting, learning a lot of new stuff. We did bring this to the TAC for an update in June, so it's been a little while. We've done a lot of work, gathered a lot of data, talked to a lot of stakeholders since then. So this will just be a little bit of an update presentation. And we had a great workshop this morning, so thanks to everyone who was free to attend that. And with that, I will hand it over to our lead consultant on the project, that'd be Evan Anderson from Cambridge Systematics.
Thank you, Jason, and good afternoon, all. Here to provide you a brief summary of where we are on the regional freight study, presenting some of our key findings and some of the feedback we've received to date. So as Jason suggested, this is really the kind of first time the region has kind of looked at an overall regional freight study. Back in June, we provided the TAC with some information on kind of existing system needs and then ongoing future trends, really pulling together some available data really to describe what is moving where in the region and how. So really looking at commodity movements, at forecasted value of tonnage, pointing out kind of challenges on safety and operational needs. And that really provides a great baseline of data that the region and local member governments can continue to use and integrate into ongoing planning efforts, as well as leverage for future project development and grant funding opportunities. Since we briefed this group in June, we've really kind of moved into the secondary phases of the project, which is really trying to understand how the region's positioned, looking at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and then really kind of putting together some conceptual future freight corridors and even future freight investment needs. We've been doing a lot of work to get at that information by talking to partners, continuing our outreach and our engagement with law enforcement, first responders, local agencies, really leveraging TAC participants and in-person workshops, and then really talking to business and industry. So being able to kind of touch base with half a dozen or so businesses that are operating within the region, doing anything from fuel and hazmat to waste hauling to advanced manufacturing to distribution, and really gaining some additional insights from those business partners. And that's really kind of helped tee up our summary of, again, overall SWOT and then future project concepts. So I'm going to kind of run through at a very high level, what we've learned so far, and welcome any comment, clarification. Any comments received today will certainly integrate into the draft document, and I'll touch on the draft and next steps here shortly. When you're kind of thinking about how the Tri-County region and Colorado Springs is positioned when it comes to goods movement, some of the strengths identified is really recognizing that there is a significant consumer base here with a growing population and economy. That really means a lot of the goods that are coming into the region are serving those retail, warehousing, hospitality industries. So there really are a lot of trucks and trains coming in on a daily basis to serve those markets. And with projected growth, that'll continue to happen. That does provide significant economic development and value added to the region overall. Really, Colorado Springs and El Paso County act as a pretty major hub for Southern Colorado and even neighboring states as far down south as Albuquerque, New Mexico, when it comes to fuel distribution, again, waste, and certainly parcel delivery. A lot of those activities are really centered in Colorado Springs as the hub. So when we kind of think about the region and the regional goods movement, it's much more than even just the Tri-County region. It's partnerships with Pueblo, and then it's really even a much broader region, southeastern Colorado and New Mexico overall. That again is a significant strength in kind of capturing a lot of that activity right here in the Tri-County area. And certainly we all recognize the importance of our military installations, how important it is for deployment access and those cities unto themselves that are responsible for moving a lot of goods, as well as kind of a growing manufacturing base that's kind of rebounding and presenting opportunity for value added and export oriented manufacturing right here in the region. So some of the strengths, when we kind of think about weaknesses, a lot of things we've heard and identified through research is really the lack of east-west connections, particularly by highway and rail. Access to the 287 Ports to Plains corridor, going down into the Gulf and seaports in Texas, are really very important for many of the natural resource and manufacturing businesses operating here. So making sure that those connections are improved to access those big interstate corridors there. And of course, when it comes to north-south connections, the region is really heavily dependent on I-25, really not having a lot of redundant routes. And so we'll touch on when operational closures might affect that corridor. It really does significantly impact businesses who rely on just-in-time delivery, or even as consumers, what's on our store shelves. We've also heard a little bit about potential constraints on distribution networks. That means businesses have noted that they've got kind of trouble bringing ocean-going containers into the region, finding trucks and logistics companies that'll help serve the markets down here. And that's really partly in reason because as a consumer market, Colorado Springs is bringing a lot of goods in, but not a lot's going out. And so many of those trucks are headed back to Denver or other markets around the country empty, and that raises cost for businesses and consumers in general. So some of those distribution networks, as the economy grows, as we develop a manufacturing base here, costs come down and shippers have better access to common carriers. We've also noted that there's a lot of interest in further developing rail-served industrial sites and providing rail access. We heard the Southern Colorado Rail Park as really being a signature regional project and very, very important to the region overall. We do know the Chamber of Commerce, works closely to kind of track those business opportunities for companies that are looking to locate in the region, but do require rail-served access overall. When it comes to opportunities, really noting that there is some pretty significant industrial development happening in the region. The new Amazon facility, which is the largest building by square footage in the state of Colorado, kind of represents some of that opportunity for the future growth areas that are planned. And along with that growing population and economy, more and more distribution, intermodal transload facilities will start to locate in the Colorado Springs market to be able to better serve that instead of operating out of facilities in Denver overall. That really is a tremendous opportunity. We've heard that the airport with potential to carry more air cargo or really be a business attractor, and the associated free trade zone, which is currently underutilized, as being a really a regional opportunity that could be leveraged for a company that's operating in the import-export markets. And then really kind of noting, this is kind of both a strength and an ongoing opportunity, but there really is significant interest in collaboration and partnership between regional partners. Again, kind of highlighting that Southern Colorado Rail Park is really one of those premier examples where you've got a lot of public-private support, interjurisdictional support, and regional support to move forward a fairly significant regional project. When it comes to threats, we've certainly noted how important our military installations are. Fort Carson in particular depends on the highway and the rail network to support deployment of heavy equipment. There is a need to kind of improve the redundancy and the resiliency of those networks. So really kind of expanding rail access and ensuring that they can move both north and south on the interstates for their deployment centers in Texas and California. Really kind of ensuring the redundancy in that network really kind of helps protect against potential base realignments and closures, and really ensures that Fort Carson continues to be pivotal in the national defense network. As I noted, as we're dependent on I-25, when there are significant weather events or operational events, businesses and consumers will feel that in the area. And so again, kind of countering that threat and being able to develop bypasses or redundant networks that have the infrastructure to support truck movements will continue to be kind of very important. And an ongoing threat that's kind of very familiar and not necessarily specific to freight, but maybe more acute. There really is not dedicated, regional funds and very limited dedicated state funds to address freight infrastructure needs. Federal funds are very competitive and often go to major mega projects. So really the overall funding for freight specific improvements, and then the ongoing maintenance of highways and even rail infrastructure as our truck traffic continues to grow, as electric vehicles or electric trucks become heavier, maintenance needs will become more and more important in the future. So that's kind of a quick overview of the kind of SWOT analysis that we heard. The study will also kind of put forward a series of recommendations and potential actions for PPACG and its partners to really kind of continue to advance freight planning efforts. First and foremost, in the kind of continued planning bucket, developing a regional freight plan. This is a regional freight study. It was just intended to kind of get the region started. Since we've been doing this, there really is a significant amount of interest from committees and partners across the region in better examining freight needs. And so a plan could really develop a lot of the concepts identified here into specific projects that might be eligible for funding or prioritization. It might really continue to do a deeper dive or analyses and look at some really targeted studies on freight specific needs, whether that might be truck parking demand and supply, where we need to locate rail access, doing a deeper dive on potential commercial motor vehicle study, safety, and really kind of understanding what those needs and improvements are. Those are a number of things that could be undertaken. Again, the study's kind of started to identify those needs, but any future study or plan could really get a lot more specific and detailed and develop action plans for some of those areas there. Kind of in the enhanced collaboration bucket of recommendations, as I noted, there really is a lot of regional interest in kind of thinking and planning about freight. And so a sort of a regional freight working group or advisory council could be formed. This could take all sorts of different forms or concepts. It could meet regularly a couple times a year. It could be a regional freight summit. But the idea would really be to bring business and industry partners to the table with local governments and local planners to have dialogue about freight issues and needs. It's really been a challenge throughout this study to reach businesses and industry partners. And some way we could continue the connections that have been made through the study would be through a kind of an ongoing working group or council that way. Certainly continuing partnerships with CDOT, with the military, with some of the regional partnerships that are in formation around major efforts like the Southern Colorado Rail Park would be fantastic to see. And it's something that regional partners could kind of support on an ongoing basis. PPACG is supporting some of the federal work that's happening now on examining Fort Carson's deployment needs, for example. And so kind of continuing that track record of collaboration and partnership around freight specific needs. When we think about kind of leveraged funding, certainly an opportunity for PPACG to track some of the federal grants that are out there. For example, there's a rail crossing elimination program that Colorado could certainly dip into a little bit more and identify potential needs. So providing information to member governments on what are some of the competitive grant opportunities out there would be a key role for PPACG on freight needs overall. Certainly some of the kind of investment or improvement concepts that the study will identify could be advanced through further planning and public review processes to become actual projects that might be eligible for some of the state funding to address freight needs overall. And then there's probably a real opportunity for public-private partnerships to address some of the freight needs in the region. There's lots of great examples nationally of public-private partnerships forming to address truck parking needs, for example, where kind of a government agency might provide land and a private business might operate as a concessionaire to really make sure there's safe and clean truck parking facilities available. Certainly lots of other examples for P3 potential here in the freight sector overall. And then kind of thinking about developing specific programs for the region, certainly one option for PPACG and a model that some MPOs have across the country is kind of really developing support programs so that member governments could develop their own freight or highway specific studies, or really kind of putting funding programs together to address safety, operations, bridge, rail crossing, you name it, needs overall. So really kind of working to develop a future pipeline to address some of those freight specific needs. And of course, there's a role for PPACG in the region to kind of develop guidance, best practices, policies around really kind of supporting and better integrating freight planning from the very start into everything that we do, particularly as we kind of think about new corridor studies, new area plans. How do we really kind of recognize the role of freight in some of those studies, and what are some of the best practices for doing that nationally? It's kind of a quick summary of some of the overall actions and recommendations that will be included in the study. Another key outcome that we're looking at is really kind of developing a regional vision freight network. This would look at highway, rail, and air, and really kind of develop, again, a strategic view of where we ought to be maybe focusing future planning efforts, or kind of using these vision networks as a trigger to say if there's a project that might be related to freight and it happens to be on the freight corridor, it might get a bump in future prioritization, or it might be a trigger for we need to better examine the freight needs, on this corridor moving forward. We had a great discussion this morning with some of the TAC members on, what this regional vision corridor network looks like. And we'll kind of continue to build this out with feedback so that we can really kind of see that vision network today and then tomorrow as future capacity and connection improvements are recommended overall. So you're seeing kind of a very high level and draft map right now, but recognizing that we would like to move towards that vision network to really help direct future planning and prioritization efforts. One of the other key outcomes of the study will really developing a set of potential future investment and improvement concepts. Really, this is we'll be identifying these through a basis of data and research. What is the data telling us that we've got potential truck crash hotspots or at-grade rail crossings or congested bottlenecks that are impacting freight delay, as well as stakeholder input from a TAC workshop that we held in June. Got a bunch of great minds together and we drew all over maps and really kind of identified based on prior plans and studies and the judgment of our local governments and planners where we ought to be kind of focusing future freight improvements. This is kind of a working list and a list in progress, but it really starts to identify where we might need future connectivity, where we need to expand key routes to provide that maybe that east-west access that we suggested earlier, or where we need to develop redundant routes for military installations or key north-south connections. So we'll be identifying a number of concepts within those areas. Rail access and safety improvements. We've identified a number of segments, particularly in Park and Teller counties, as well as a number of at-grade rail crossings that could be improved within El Paso County, kind of continuing to flesh out what those locations are and what those overall needs might be. But along some of our mountain corridors, some of those safety needs might be, more significant passing lanes, wider shoulders for safe pull-off, chain-up stations, rest areas, both to the east and west of our region overall. Resiliency and redundancy is, again, kind of come up as a major theme and need, both from a business and a planning perspective. So, identifying some of those key corridors that could act as bypasses, making sure that they can handle truck traffic, addressing any bridge, oversized, overweight issues that might be on those routes, so that we have a little bit more redundancy overall in the regional network. And then operational improvements, really kind of looking again at bypasses, climbing lanes, shoulders, chain-up stations, some of the hard infrastructure that can really accommodate truck movements to make it safe for every traveler out there. So this again is kind of an initial list. We're working with TAC and member governments and our stakeholders to really refine these concepts, and would be presented in the overall study. So when it comes to kind of where we are in the next steps for this, we are continuing to engage regional stakeholders, having conversations with many of our partners that we started off this effort on. So chambers, airports, state and local law enforcement and emergency responders, and then businesses themselves. So we're really going to be doing a concerted effort over the next little while to try and reach truck drivers themselves, as well as those kind of carrier companies, the Walmarts, the Goodwills, the UPSs, the FedExes, and the drivers that actually have that real on-the-road experience to better understand some of the barriers and challenges of moving around the region. We've got some kind of unique ways we think we can go about that, including some social media pushes and potential on-site visits at major truck stops in Monument or down south. We're going to be continuing to kind of vet the key findings and overall recommendations and those corridors and concepts that I just presented with committees and regional stakeholders. Really kind of iterating and taking the feedback so that we're really refining those overall recommendations for the study. We do intend to provide an opportunity for public review and comment with that 30-day period starting later this month. So that draft will be released overall to the public. It will be continued to be refined based on some of the vetting we're doing with, again, committees and stakeholders. We've got one touch base with a touch point with the board. We will be holding a board workshop in November to get further comment on the study, present some of those key findings, and we'll certainly iterate and integrate some of that feedback we're hearing from board members. So that committee process and review process will take us really kind of through December, with the intent of publishing the final study early in the spring of 2024. So that was the quick level summary again of what we've been doing and what we've heard since we last briefed this committee, and then what we will be doing over the next couple months. Certainly welcome any comments or questions on any content that we've provided here.
Thank you, Evan. Appreciate your presentation. And fortunately, I was able to hear most of the same information earlier today. And it really got me thinking about really the resiliency and safety of our structures going through El Paso County. So one of the things I went back in and looked at your draft here. So on page, and Jared, if you could help me out, on page 58, if we could start there first, this is 55. But on the bottom, going down where it talks about freight programs. So I think this is a great ad about the regional bridge improvements and the rail crossing improvements. So thank you for putting that in there. What made me wonder is if we should have some emphasis on actionable projects related to railroad bridges or at-grade rail crossings. In particular, the bridges are what would come to mind to me, and I'm wondering if we should have some kind of generic project included in that project list that could really be, frankly, it's a catch-all for any kind of the rail structures. I personally, through the city of Colorado Springs, have 40-some different crossings, not that many bridges, but culverts and things like that. Should there be some kind of failure or issue where I needed to go and capture federal funding, I'd like to be able to identify it, that there's some kind of overall bridge or crossing type program that we might want to identify back on page 55. So I'm wondering if you've given any thought to that, or if you could add a project in there that maybe could encompass this concern with our rail bridge structures.
Thank you for that. And I think, great idea. And that's certainly something we can do. I think we'd like to integrate into the overall, future improvement investment concepts, just kind of identifying some of those at-grade crossings and even rail structures that are publicly owned. We have incident data that could go along with that, including motor vehicle crashes or even trespassing that could relate to safety or risk issues. And we can kind of prioritize or include some high-level conceptual identification of those crossings within this study.
So I'm asking you not necessarily to do that. I'm asking for a more generic categories, future project that may not necessarily be behind. And you also hit on something else where you said publicly owned. Frankly, there's two issues that sometimes there's a discrepancy on who owns it, one. And two, even if a railroad, let's say, were to own it, if it is putting a local jurisdiction's infrastructure at risk, I'm going to pick on Tejon Street for a moment. I want the ability to be able to define a project and really force the railroads into a project, whether we end up paying for it or at least have the ability to go and capture federal funding. So I'd like to see something defined in the project area, and I'd be happy to help you work on that language. But I think it's going to be important for us to be able to go and capture fundings for something we don't even know about yet.
Yes, so we don't have an incident like on 925. But I love your idea, but I actually would like to expand it a little since we're looking at freight, not just limiting that to railroad crossings. We have bridges, and I know we can't fund them through PPACG, but since this is a broader look at all 3 counties, we have bridges that are load posted, that we can have school buses go over, better yet, a tractor trailer. And so I'd like to maybe expand your future project category.
Well, okay. No, I think that's a valid, and maybe it's two. One is specific to railroads and one is not specific to railroads, because he does mention under the regional bridge program, which I think it's valid if you happen to have a bridge that could be eligible, let's say for the bridge investment program that you can't define, or you might have 50 bridges that could potentially be candidates for that we have a generic catch-all potential in the freight plan. So Evan, if you could prepare maybe 1 or 2 potential projects, and if it's okay with the PPACG staff, but I think what we're asking for, if we could add maybe 2 different generic projects to maybe capture these bridge concerns.
So Evan, I'm getting kind of the I'm a cool dude head nod from Jason. So I think provided we have the budget and scope to put something together, let's go ahead and do it. So Jason, did I misinterpret the head nod?
Nope, you're right on. Just here in case there's any other comments or discussion.
And can I add on there, we didn't talk about rail crossings, and that is potentially an issue for some folks, even maybe more so than for the city of Colorado Springs. But if you wouldn't mind working with them on maybe potentially 3 that we could circulate through the CAC through an email distribution, so we could give you some feedback on that and help you move along without waiting on us to give you some direction, we'd be happy to do so.
That sounds great, actually.
Yeah. Thank you. And thanks, Evan, again for your presentation. And thank you for doing it twice for me in the same day, but I actually made me think more about, just about what you said earlier and really trying to comprehend it. So I appreciate your time today.
Thank you. We appreciate the feedback.
Yeah, great.
He gave it once, then drove back to Denver, then did it again.
Oh, is that how it worked out? Well, see, now I'm in the office. I was sitting in my office a bit earlier. Anyway, so this was just a discussion item. So I think that you got what you needed. Is that correct, Jason?
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thanks, Evan. Anything else from you before we move along?
Anything else from the members of the TAC? All right, great. I think we're ready to move on to item 7C. And I believe, Jeff Guthrie, you would like to talk about a tip-step amendment for RPP funding.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, staff, for my promotion here on the paper to Region 2 Manager. I am definitely not that.
I believe there will be a commensurate pay adjustment, and we like going out to lunch.
Meanwhile, so we're here before you, we being our Region 2 North Program Engineer John Hall and I, to give you our requested RPP additions specific to fiscal year 28. And to give you a little context, we're working backwards timeline-wise from our STIP development process this upcoming spring, where we planners are asked to incorporate any new projects that we wish to add to our statewide transportation improvement plan at that time. And so in this October timeframe, we are going to each of our TPRs and obviously our 2 MPO partners to present what we, Region 2, we would like to either change or add to the PPACG, in this case, RPP program. And the PDF spreadsheet that we included in there, we'll be reviewing that here. Before I go any further, let me just turn this over to John, actually, to highlight the changes from there.
So what you all have in front of you is the RPP plan. It's a updated, tweaked version of the one that you guys go through every year. I haven't been involved in that process personally, but every year updated. So the main purpose right now today is to update to add the 2028. That's what we're here to get approved and add the 2028. So the reason why there are in those 2 columns on 2028, there are some highlighted yellow is because I wanted to highlight things. The last year, the last time you guys went through this, 2028, 29, and 30 were actually filled in as well, right? Even though we weren't into those years yet. So now we're actually advancing 2028, and pretty much the only changes that we're suggesting, one is previously there were $500,000 in the row for 24476 signal replacements on 24 and 21. Okay, that's an active project that actually finished. So we really shouldn't have stuff in that same line. We are recommending moving that 500,000 down to just mobility and safety improvements on US 24 G, east side of town. Same general area, mobility and safety improvements. No change in the dollar amounts. The other change that we're proposing from the version from a year ago or 2 years ago is that back when that was created, a line for $3 million was put in for US 24 21st Street grade separated interchange. Well, that's the very last project on the most recent 10-year capital list. I mean, the very last project on the bottom of the gray, like future projects. So it's probably it just doesn't make sense that that is going to be where we would put $3 million. The lowest priority project on the entire list, and not even the lowest priority on the out year stuff. So we're proposing to readjust that same $3 million, adding $2 million, $2 million more to the safety and operational improvements on I-25. So that's why that has 3 million. That previously had 1 million. That goes up to 3 million. And we're proposing taking the third million and putting it on US 24 west over Ridge Road. Again, those are both 10-year capital projects, both 27 plus, but in the funded program with CDOT for 27 plus, seems like those are just kind of the better projects to put that funds into to make sure they continue to progress forward. It's the same 7.5 million total that has been planned for years now. And while we're here, I did want to discuss a few other little changes that we're recommending making to this too. You can see in the 27 column. So I don't think this is necessary part of the approval effort. We're approving 28. But some other things that I definitely would like to get at least some tentative approval. I'm not sure if it's an administrative, if in the end it's an administrative approval or not, but in 27, there was 800,000 put in on our list on the, am I not talking well enough? Oh,
No,
it's not coming
Jeff
through.
is like giving me hand signals.
Oh,
or
sorry.
Either that or the gang signs and we're gonna throw down afterwards. I'm not sure, but I
I
was just
hope-
saying, I
I
don't
did-
understand.
I
We'll
didn't-
talk after.
I didn't bring my my brass knuckle, so I don't want any gang fights afterwards. I'll avoid those. So in the 27 column, you'll see where there was 800,000. It's been previously, it's actually been stipped and all as well. But listed under US 24A safety improvements. We're just going to shift that up to US 24G safety improvements. And that's simply to make it actually in alignment with your tip. Your tip, I believe it's 2022. I have it in the notes at the bottom. 2021 04-047 has that $800,000 in 24G. We just want to make that adjustment to realign. And the last thing I want to bring up is not noted on here, but brought up at PPACG board just a week ago, right? Was some significant issues up on Highway 105 just outside of Palmer Lake. We would like to start addressing that, so I'm going to be sending an email request. Again, I don't know that this group has to approve this or if it could just be administrative, but you guys, you'll note that in 2020 of RPP 2025 money, there's 500,000 for State Highway 21 mobility and safety improvements and 500,000 for State Highway 24G mobility and safety improvements. We would like to start tapping those resources and put initially 100,000 so we could do some quick design, hopefully on 105, and potentially tap more of those resources to actually build the repair. There's not really anything directly, there's not an improvement directly linked to those right now yet anyway. So that's all I have pending questions.
So Jeff, again, I apologize, but I wasn't quite clear as to what you were sort of, anything you'd like to add?
A point of clarification, per the PPACG tip amendment policy, if there are changes to RPP, it is a policy amendment. Am I correct?
Yes. And so, well, it depends on where it's taking place. Again, if another body, for example, a State Transportation Commission, has grabbed some money and has moved it over, we either get the money or we don't get the money. We don't get to sort of do that. So for the most part, I believe those have been treated as an administrative amendment. But other sorts of things, it's an actual sort of, it's a full-blown amendment. So this, again, if the money is there and we're just accounting for it, is a policy amendment the same thing as an administrative amendment, or are we?
Jeff is using the words policy amendment in the way that we would use formal amendment. So a formal amendment goes through our committees and has to be approved by our board. An administrative amendment or an administrative modification does not.
So again, I think depending on where the funding is coming from, it sounds like this does need to be a full amendment that would go through the process, TAC, CAC, and board. I do have another sort of clarification, and part of me is saying I should just be quiet, and as long as these two get it, I should just be quiet. But again, I've embarrassed myself here before, so why not one more time? So yeah. So look, so normally what happens, and again, I think one of the things is when we talk about CDET funds, it's always a little weird, right? Because you have your own very unique funding sources. And half the time, the only reason we're doing this is the feds have said, hey, if you're using federal dollars, we need to see this in the regional tip that is applicable. I used the word applicable correctly, right? So, and that's when we've sort of done that. And that's when, again, we've done those administrative ones where, again, like maintenance money or something, where the performance directive 14 has been used, and we've said, and CDOT's moved some money around, and sometimes it's state money it moves around from faster, and we don't need it's not federal, so it doesn't need to be in the tip, and you guys just do it. Sometimes they're federal dollars, and therefore they need to be in there. And again, sometimes it's an amendment, an administrative amendment, or sometimes it's a full-blown formal amendment. So without knowing the fund source, I'm going to say this has to sort of go through. But the other confusing thing, and I've been doing this a while, and it's still confusing for me. So if all of you around the table are saying you all get this, no, I'm just kidding. But it gets confusing because we have the CDOT 10-year plan, right? And all of these changes are to the CDOT 10-year plan. Normally, we don't adjust that until we receive a signal from basically CDOT Denver that says, hey, we need to update all the 10-year plans, run it through your process, and then we're going to post it on the CDOT website, right? So part of me is thinking that this is part of a 10-year plan amendment, but that's not the case. Okay, you're shaking your head. So that clarified one thing for me. And then before I go on to the next thing, it looks like you want to say something. So then the next real question then is, then this is just talking about an amendment to our tip. If it's the current year, we can do the amendment now. But if we're talking about out years, we can roll any sort of information into the development of the new tip when it goes out to advertise. And the next tip is the 25-29. So if all of your changes are either in the years 25 through 29, we can just put that through into that tip process. Does that work for you, or do you guys need something different? And have I just, or are you guys, like, again, just waiting for me to shut up because you already got this?
Well, as far as I understand, what we need is to finalize the process with you in the coming months to add the 2028. And therefore, so you approve it and then we can stip it. That's the first thing. I just meant to explain for those who might have been familiar with the lists that were done for the spreadsheets that were done years ago, what we're recommending that changed, same total dollar amount. The other two changes are, the 800,000 one and 27, whatever, the timeline on that obviously is urgent. Putting $100,000 utilizing of, let's call it the Powers Boulevard, 500,000 and 25. I think there's a sense of urgency to that because supposedly the road, the comment is the road is falling apart as we speak. So,
Okay.
Whatever we can do to expedite that ability for us to get that approval, at least for the initial $100,000 and get working on that would be helpful.
And so that would be a tip amendment for that one particular thing because we want to put it in the current year tip.
Well, it is 25 technically.
Yeah. So but then all of the rest of this, especially the stuff on 105 that you just mentioned that's not denoted, I think if you guys give us a new spreadsheet, we could just roll it in to the new tip adoption that's coming up in a month or now, right? The process is now, but it's going through the committee process next month. We can accommodate that. Is that work or am I just still more confused?
As long as that think, Jeff.
No, it's difficult stuff, man. It's not easy.
That
Especially
draft,
you guys are a weird, right? When you look at CDOT, you're a weird duck compared to the other jurisdictions. And that's why I'm not just being like, oh, I'm like a country lawyer and I don't know anything. I know I'm really honestly confused because again, the CDOT process is so weird. So don't worry about it, man.
quack.
Like Gail says, you're amongst friends.
It's my understanding, number one, that RPP is the one funding source that we must seek the approval of each of our planning partners to program the funds where they're listed and in what year, number one.
Okay.
Number two, again, the timing of this coincides on our end, at least, with early this next year, me presenting to headquarters the draft list of new project additions. Thirdly, for the group to understand as a point of clarification, we're not adding any funds to this. This is working within the existing fiscal constraints, hence the puzzle pieces moving around to accommodate the $1 million for this and the $500,000 for that. That has to come from somewhere. And then finally, just so the group understands, we are seeking the tax approval to then take this to your board for final approval over the next, I would say, 2 months would be a great timeline, if especially that jives with you guys.
And so I think, Madam Chair, the two questions right now is one is especially the things that are not already in writing, but that John has talked about moving stuff for 105. I think like to make sure that everyone here is cool with that as well as what's written. And then if everyone's cool, the next question is, can we put the current stuff in the tip amendment and the future stuff in the next tip? Right? No, she's shaking her head. I got it.
They're on the same schedule, so it wouldn't matter.
So it wouldn't matter?
So, but there's another question. No, I am going to try to help us get to a solution, but since 105 wasn't already in the 10-year plan, is it in the long-range transportation plan? Because if it's not, then we're also going to have to amend the long-range transportation plan.
Good point.
So do you know the answer to that question? One, please correct me if I'm wrong. And two, even if it's not specific to that corridor, do you have a roadway safety project out that major project where we could put the money in there and not have to go through the LRTP amendment?
Danelle's looking it up now.
Yeah, I don't.
What funding source would it be for State Highway 105? It wouldn't be it would be RPP. Okay, hold on just a second.
While you're looking that up, this is maybe more of a question for John. I understand what you're trying to do with the puzzle piece. We all have to deal with this, right? When we moved the US 24 and 21st grade separation to the bottom of the 10-year plan are outside the fiscal constraints. I thought we moved US 24 and 31st Street up.
I think that's accurate.
It's just not anywhere
but
within the
it's
step, or that your proposed step. Okay, just want to make sure. Thank you.
Incidentally, our long-range plan the initial cut that we sent over, for example, has that 31st Street higher to Lincoln.
On a nice, right? Like up to the so. Like between
South.
Lake and Monument?
Yeah.
That's
That's state highway.
It's in?
We have a bike lanes from Palmer Lake to Monument.
Yeah.
But that's a Palmer Lake project.
Yeah, that's different.
But again, what is the scope of the project? So we can see if it's in a pool, it would be qualified for a pool. We did set up pools.
The road's falling apart because of drainage undermining on the,
So is it
it's
a maintenance reconstruct?
yes.
Then that doesn't need to be in the long range plan. That's regular.
That's why I want to make sure.
It's a maintenance
I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's what I want.
Then
That
you're
was the
good.
second part of my question. If it's maintenance reconstruct, and is it okay to apply the RPP funds for that
Yeah.
without creating an issue? Okay, good. So we're past that. So you need to be able to, the fastest way possible to get the initial $100,000. And I think as Danelle and Jess were mentioning that because we're getting ready to do a tip or adopt a new tip, it's probably just as fast to do that as opposed to amending the current tip because they'd have to go through a process. Or is there any way we could expedite to get them the funds sooner?
We could put it, if the TAC approves it today, we could take it to CAC and board in the next 3 weeks.
Okay,
As
So-
a tip amendment, correct?
As a tip amendment. Yeah.
But
Okay.
just for the 25, everything else that in the out years would be in the new tip.
so I think what we're looking at are two actions from a motion. One is to verbally approve or ask for a tip amendment to include is it just 100,000 that you need for 105, John? To
Well,
start with?
That would start for design, yes.
Okay, to approve $100,000 in a tip amendment to be applied to State Highway 105 between Monument and Palmer Lake. And then the second part of this is going to be to include the rest of the request in with our ongoing tip process for 2025 to 2029. Is that correct? Is that what we're asking?
Yes.
Okay, so if somebody could restate that, or I could restate it and somebody could make the motion, we can do this again.
All right, I'll try. So I move approval to provide $100,000 in RPP funding in 2025 for Highway 105 maintenance project. And then to approve 26 through, I can't read, 29 into our tip approval process.
And I believe it's 25 through 29.
25 through 29.
Yes.
Thank you.
Friendly amendment. All right, so we've got a motion for Victoria. Any further or a motion?
No. And this is Jason. I'll second that motion.
Okay, so we've got a motion for Victoria, second from Jason to do a tip amendment for $100,000 for State Highway 105 for their maintenance project, and then to include the rest of the requests in the tip process for 2025 to 2029. All right, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? All right, the motion with two parts passes, and it looks like we have a staff comment.
So,
for
and then just a
clarification.
clarification, since you've made some adjustments to this for the 105, can you send us a new one to make sure that we get it all booked correctly?
Absolutely.
Can we also get a formal letter from CDOT requesting the 105 amendment for
Of
the
course.
board's record?
My
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Thank you, and thanks for bringing that to us, and hopefully we got you what you needed to get going.
Yep, thank you.
All right,
Andrew.
let's move on. Let's go back to the agenda item. In the longest tip meeting ever, I want you to know this is twice as long as any other TAC meeting we've had in the last year. Item 8A, CDOT updates, standing updates. So Kathleen, I'm going to let you go first if you're still online.
Yes, I'm here. In fact, I'm going to cut and paste some updates into the chat. But just a few items. Eric Sabina has been announced as the new Deputy Division of Transportation Development Director. And then I have some links to 2 positions for planners that are opened up for the multimodal planning branch. As was mentioned previously, the STAC meetings, we have recommendations for RPP and the MMOF funding programs for program distribution. And the next STAC meeting is November 2nd. And then for the TC, there was a budget workshop, policy directive on rail corridor preservation policy. 1607 was overviewed. Also, we had a passenger rail update and an audit review committee meeting among the agenda items. And that's my update, and I'm going to cut and paste text related to this to the chat. So thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Online, also from CDOT, I think, Lachelle, you're still there.
I am, and I don't have anything. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe there was somebody else from CDOT, and it's hard to see. If there's anyone from CDOT like to give an update online, please do so. I'm not seeing anyone coming off mute. All right, and then anyone else for our partners from CDOT that are here, Jeff or John, anything else you need to add? All right, awesome. Moving on to item 8B, IIJA updates and other funding opportunities.
Just a quick update. The Colorado Energy Office has released the Fleet Zero Emission Resource Opportunity. That opened just this Monday. It will close Friday, December 1st. The Bridge Investment Program for large bridges, that NOFO came out late September and will be due November 27th. The Planning Projects Grant and Bridge Projects Grant, that'll be coming out in November. Also, the Railroad Crossing Elimination Program should be coming out by the end of October. But that's really the only funding related items that we have dates for right now. Chrissy is expected to open this fall, but we don't have any more information at this point.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. Any on item 8C, tip updates?
Yes, so the call for projects is going to close again here very soon. We're looking at holding the project selection workshop probably November 2nd, Thursday. That way we can have that wrapped up in the draft document ready to go through the committee process next month. So that's where we're at with that. Reach out if you have any questions.
Jess, can I just ask you at a minute, either send the invite out for that workshop or at least save the date for that workshop, because
Yes, it's not official yet. I'm just collecting everyone's doodle responses still, so.
Can you please send the date out anyway, or it won't
Yep.
happen even if you've done the doodle? You'll be redoodling.
No, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
We'll redoodling. No, yes, absolutely. We will send that out to you.
Perfect, thank you. Moving on to item 9, member entity announcements. I have nothing from the city of Colorado Springs today. I'm going to go around to my right, Lan.
In addition to the 2050 transit plan, we released the request for qualification for our Academy Enhanced Transit Corridor Study. This RFQ will be open until December the 18th with a pre-proposal conference scheduled on October the 30th.
Great.
Thank you.
Lan. Anything else to add?
I do not have anything else to add.
Perfect. Thank you. You've been so patient today.
Just one announcement. So we had some road work in the vicinity of Schriever recently. So just wanted to thank Victoria and the county for coordinating with us. we had to work around with some gate closures and changing our traffic operations. So thanks for getting the word out. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, nothing from Palmer Lake, thanks.
All right, well, PPACG, anything else you need to add? All right, we're going to move on to item 9. Any future TAC meeting agenda items, John?
I know we're tired, but so I'll try to make this brief. But I did want to again mention that we have a very firm deadline on the 2050 LRTP. It has to be adopted by January of 2025. We are shooting for December of 2024. So obviously we're 14 months out. And the question has come up of, well, what happens if we don't finish? Because we do have the state GHG process that we have to work through. We do have posted comment periods of 30 days or whatever for certain items. We have certain public outreach activities that have to happen. So we're trying to stuff basically, 10 pounds of planning in a 5-pound bag, right? So what happens if we do not make our deadline for whatever reason? And again, we are all working diligently towards making the deadline. But what happens is your plan can either be no more than 5 years old if you're in attainment, which we are, 4 years if you're in non-attainment, and it can't have a horizon year of less than 20 years. But what happens if you fall out of either one of those two criterion is that you become a non-compliant plan. So it's not like at midnight on January 30th that, oh, the plan no longer good. Our plan that's adopted now, the 2045, stays in full force and effect until it's replaced by a new plan. But what happens when you become non-compliant is that you can no longer amend that plan. So if we don't meet our target of January of 2025 or our drop dead date of 2025, our target is December of 24, is that we would not be able to process any TIP amendments. So you cannot amend a non-compliant plan. So
Wait, a TIP amendment? Plan amendment.
a TIP amendment, because the TIPs come from your long range plan. So that's the thing is, again, we'll sort of revisit this again in maybe 5 or 6 months and sort of look at where we're at in the process. But I know that from, CDOT perspective and probably El Paso County and Colorado Springs, the bigger guys that are like putting out projects, there's a certain risk that you're like planning on doing that you're going to do a bid opening and you're going to do it. And all of a sudden, oh, well, we didn't get the bids under where we needed to. We need to do a quick TIP amendment. That's a problem. We cannot base a TIP or amend based on a long range, a non-compliant plan. So that being said, I just wanted to sort of give everyone that sort of initial heads up that we're working diligently to get to where we all need to go. And you guys have been great, especially today, approving everything that we needed you to approve to keep on schedule. But I just wanted to make sure you guys could sort of be aware of that risk and understand we'll revisit it again and reevaluate where we're at the timeline. Okay. So thanks.
So John, thank you. So that will be a future agenda item. I have to tell you, frankly, it's very concerning. I mean, we just saw the situation that CDOT's in today with the 105. Thankfully, we were in an ability to go into an amendment essentially to help accommodate something that's urgent for them to take action on. I have a couple of questions, but I think nothing else because it can impact anyone in this room that we need to have a schedule where we are in relationship to our schedule. I would say on a monthly basis to know that as part of our LRTP update and how we're tracking with the schedule because we're at such risk. 2, I want to ask a question just to make sure because you talked about amending the long range transportation plan. So we could, if we came in valid, we couldn't amend the long range transportation plan and we could not amend the TIP, correct?
That is correct. You cannot amend a non-conforming plan. So It's not like we can go, oh, well, let's just, to sort of reset the clock, let's just do a quick sort of thing. No, once that milk has turned sour, we're not making biscuits with it anymore. So we need to sort of either make sure we have some new milk on board, or we plan on living without biscuits for a little while in the beginning of 25.
Okay, thank you. And then my third question, and then I know Victoria wants to ask a question. You know, I believe we did a pretty significant update when I first joined the TAC. I believe it was in the third or fourth quarter of 2021. Does that, because it was a significant update, does that buy us an additional time? So that's when our plan went into effect.
A very good memory. Yes, we amended the TIP in October of 2021. And we did do a Title VI analysis and fiscal constraint, and we did a very robust activity. We did reach out to FHWA and asked if that rose to the level of an amendment that would reset the clock. And we were notified that it did not meet the criteria for resetting the clock. So
even if we went through, basically, it was a whole new LRTP with those additional efforts.
Yes, yes. Like I said, we've asked, and the answer is no. So we've moved on.
Yeah, go ahead, Victoria. I'm still pondering that response.
So not a question, just a comment. As you go through this, you might want to take a look at a couple elements that if things start to get crunched, that we drop out of the long-range transportation plan and do separately later as standalone plans. Just to help your timeline, just in case.
And I will even add on to that, if there are elements or appendices that go in that plan, if the ones that were already in place could also be included in the adopted 2050 plan, with amendments coming after that plan was adopted. I'm still pondering the response to that question, because I feel like you really did a 2047 plan, right? We had.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk offline, and I can let you know about the interaction we had with FHWA. But we did ask, and we did have the same thought process that perhaps it was sufficient, and it was not. And again, they get to determine what's sufficient and what's not, and they said it's not. We've moved on.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Otherwise, we'll be getting schedule updates on the LRTP.
Yeah, and again, I know we want to cut the meeting. I just want to say again, you know, when we adopted the last plan, we were like, we have 5 years. Well, apparently I didn't plan for a global pandemic. Silly me, but that ate about 18 months out of our schedule. And in addition to when that pandemic hit, we here at PPACG, when we have our AAA division, our Area Agency on Aging, they get a lot of volunteers that do in-kind help. They come and they man the staff, this desk or that desk. Well, obviously, those folks had to stay home, so they couldn't volunteer. So when it came to your local dues that we get from you, the jurisdictions, we had to make sure that more got budgeted to AAA, because AAA no longer had their volunteers, than what would come to PPACG. So I was sort of trying to figure out how to do this. One of the first things we did is we moved the transit, Specialized Human Services Transit Plan over to MMT. And so thank you very much to MMT to stepping up and helping us solve that financial problem. So the finances made us do that. But what happened is then we had to go into a different procurement process than what we were used to. If it's in our work program, I can go through the procurement process. But because it was not in our work program anymore, and it was now with the City of Colorado Springs and MMT, we had to bring in CDOT. And it was just a little different. And I don't think people quite knew what to make of it. But that took a significant amount of time, I believe somewhere in the neighborhood of 18 months. Not all on CDOT. There's lots of different folks who didn't do it. But basically, I think that put us another 18 months behind schedule. Additionally, the plans that you're kind of hearing updates now for the freight plan, active transportation plan, other things like that. Again, instead of running through our work program where I'm paying the match, we turn them into toll credit projects. So again, where I can control the timeline, all of those projects had to go through the CDOT procurement process. Again, CDOT did a wonderful job sort of doing it, but again, it's just more time than we had that we were able to schedule for. So I just wanted you to know we are where we are, not because I was off chasing butterflies, but because we just had things that were beyond our control. But what's within our control is what we can do in the next 14 months, and we're going to really push it as hard as we can.
Okay. Great. Thank you, John, for that update. So any other agenda items? All right. Hearing none, I'm going to adjourn this meeting at 3:40 p.m.